It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, February 28th, 2025. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Reno, Nevada, I am John Ramey. On this episode, which we are taping on Thursday the 27th, for publication on Friday the 28th, we will discuss the visit to the White House from the leaders of France and the United Kingdom. We will discuss the German elections, and we'll talk about rare earths in Ukraine, taking center stage in U.S.-Ukrainian relations, despite 3 years of Russian aggression in Ukraine. Hi, Sam.
Hi, John.
Shall we start with our buddies Macron and Starmer, Emmanuel and Kier, visiting the U.S. president? Dateline Washington, AP reporting. French President Emmanuel Macron traveled to Washington, seeking to convince U.S. President Donald Trump to stand by Europe's side in his talks with Russia about ending the war in Ukraine. As Macron left the White House, he called the meeting a, quote, turning point, yet Trump made no promises. Macron was the first European leader to visit Trump since his re-election, aiming to capitalize on their relationship to urge Trump to not, quote, be weak in dealing with Russian President Vladimir Putin. I thought Macron played nice with Trump. It appears that Macron understands that flattery is the way to deal with Trump, to try to have a productive discussion.
Yes,
Did
and
I
sort
read
of
that right?
reverse insults, right? In other words, urging him to not be weak, right? Not saying that he was being weak, but urging him not to, right? So it's sort of photo-negative flattery, right? It has the same impact, but you're not actually flattering the person, right? Oh, you don't want to come off as weak now, do you? Right? I mean, and I think that's probably pretty effective. Now, the thing is, this is going to be a problem that we're going to run into every week, just to sort of flag the folks at home on this, right? Is that Trump says things to reporters every day. Right. And some of these things are not exactly the same things he said the day before. Some of them are totally bonkers. And so it's really difficult to sort of remember what he said when and sort through all of them. And so it can
in a previous age, such wild, reckless, and inconsistent rhetoric would be disqualifying for public office.
We would have hoped it would be anyway.
Anyway, carry on. It's not now, so carry on.
The point is that when it's easy to sort of lose track of the things that he says over time.
It sure is.
Right? But one thing he said in the immediate, and remember, and it's difficult also to remember when he said this or that thing, right? Which may still be in effect and may not be. And so this is a challenge for all of us, I think. But one thing he said after meeting with Macron was that he confirmed Macron's willingness to send French troops to Ukraine, right? Which Macron has mentioned as early as last year. And Starmer, that is the UK prime minister, is expected to say the same thing and has in fact said so publicly, that he is willing to send British troops to Ukraine. And Trump said after meeting with Macron that the Russians would be okay with this.
That's not true.
Which seemed to make news at the time, right? But because it was entirely at odds, as you say, with everything the Russians had said up to that point.
If the Russians don't want Ukraine to be in NATO, why would they want NATO countries' troops in Ukraine?
Well, in fact, they don't. Immediately after Trump said this, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov came out and said, no, that's not acceptable to us. And then
we're not down.
Yeah, and then he was followed by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov saying exactly the same thing. No, this is unacceptable, was the word that Lavrov used to describe the idea of British troops, or British and or French troops, or any other European troops on the ground in Ukraine. Never mind that they've got their troops on the ground totally illegally. But I think the reason this is important is that this was the first time that Trump had, or anybody on his team, had said anything that was at all at odds with what the Russians were saying. So it did seem to indicate some daylight opening up between Trump, the Trump position, and the Russian position. And I think we can see that as perhaps a good sign, right?
Or
If
just a
Trump,
mistake.
but
He just
again,
misspoke.
if Trump is open to the idea of this happening, that means he doesn't actually fully sign up with the Russian agenda in Ukraine. And so we have this again. There's some movement happening here. For to turn to the well, we don't know what.
Hold on. I'm sorry.
Okay.
If he, I agree, this may indicate that Donald Trump is not lockstep with the Russian agenda for Ukraine. But could it be that he just doesn't understand it?
Oh, well, that's certainly a possibility, right? But the
Like he
point
just
is,
doesn't understand the totality of what Russia
I
wants in
think
Ukraine?
that's certainly not just a possibility. I think that's a likelihood. But
Okay.
the point is that means
But that's
that
still better than being in lockstep.
yes, that means that he can be informed about things. Now he might not care, he might not change his mind, but if there's things he doesn't know, then if somebody tells him those things, it might actually affect his thinking, if we want to call it that. And so, for instance, 2 weeks ago, the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Scott Bessent, was in Ukraine meeting with President Zelensky and a number of other Ukrainian officials. And it was widely reported, although off the record, at that time, that he had essentially presented Ukraine with a deal that he wanted them to sign immediately to guarantee $500 billion. Now, I'm not sure if this is profits or revenues. That was not quite made clear, right? But $500 billion worth of mineral concessions in Ukraine in return for nothing at all. No security guarantees, nothing. No U.S. troops, no NATO membership, nothing at all. And the reason I think this was reported so quickly in Ukraine was because it's outrageous, right? And this is the one of the sources of the rift that opened up between Zelensky and Trump at that time. One thing that we forget, I think, is that even though we think of Zelensky as this brave wartime leader, right, constantly walking around in fatigues and stuff like this, and I'm not saying that that's inaccurate, but we forget that, like Trump, Zelensky came to the presidency of his country as a television performer. And quite a lot of the things he does draw on that experience, I think very effectively, by the way. And so he has to come out and say that he's outraged by that. And after all, it is an outrageous proposal, right? But he can't just sit there and say, oh, no, that's fine, right? And so this was the point I'm making is that this whole sort of hue and cry between the two of them, it was real, but it was also partly performative on part of both of them, right? Now,
which makes sense given their backgrounds.
Yeah. Exactly. Now, since then, there's actually been some movement on these negotiations, and Zelensky is expected to appear in Washington tomorrow to sign this deal, although he still himself says that this is a preliminary deal, right? And this is the sort of draft proposal, right? And so that these are the sorts of words that are being used in reference to this arrangement today, right? Is preliminary, draft.
Sorry, you say tomorrow, that is Friday when this will publish.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. But you're right, preliminary draft, because Trump might change his mind.
Yes, but there's other reasons for this also. And I think, and this speaks to the point you were making before about what Trump does or does not know.
Or understand.
Yeah, or care about necessarily. And I happened to see a couple of different interviews yesterday. The first one was on the ABC News streaming YouTube channel, right? Which I almost never watched, but this happened to crop up. And it was an interview with an economist at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., and her name was Gracelyn Bhaskaran. And she is again is an economist specializing in minerals, and she, I thought, gave the most succinct appraisal of what this deal really means. And in doing so, she described the Ukrainian mineral industry, that is the mining industry, as nascent. Now, that literally means newborn, right? But in this context, obviously means something more like undeveloped, right? And the point is that Ukraine has extensive mineral deposits, but almost nobody has bothered to dig them up out of the ground so far. And I'm sure there's
It's
a number of,
expensive.
yes, that's right. And up until the point that Zelensky took over, and probably for some time after that, even, Ukraine is one of the most notoriously corrupt nations on earth, right? And you don't want to, not to mention that Putin has obviously had geopolitical designs on Ukraine for ever, and explicitly for at least 20 years,
You don't
right?
want to dig up all the good metals just in time for the Russians to come across the border and take them.
Exactly. And that's not going to change,
No, because
right?
that's where the rare earths are.
That's right. So if Trump goes to some investor in a large mining company and says, "Oh, look, I got you these great mining concessions in Ukraine," that investor is going to say, "Okay, if you're not giving security guarantees to Ukraine,
Yeah, I'm not.
why should I
Yeah,
bother going there to dig up anything?" Right? Because it's good. And as Dr. Baskaran pointed out, uh, mining takes a long time, right? It's a good decade for almost any mine on Earth before you're going to see a nickel out of it.
hey,
See what I did there?
one of
Anyway,
the one of the metals that Ukraine has.
exactly, right? And so this dovetailed very nicely with an interview I saw later with a fellow whose name I will probably get wrong, but it was, if I remember correctly, was Timothy Milovanov, who at one point was an economic official in the Ukrainian government under Zelensky. Uh, and he confirmed everything that Dr. Baskaran had said, but he had also seen the draft as it stood yesterday
Hmm.
of the proposal. And again, he was saying it's very preliminary, and there's things that will still need to be worked out. And so I think that this is sort of a much more important version of the Canadian fentanyl czar that the folks at home will remember from a few episodes ago, right? It's just like something you can offer Trump so that he can say he won. Uh, because even, for instance, that $500 billion deal, secretly, Zelensky might have been perfectly happy to go along with that because it's like, yeah, fine, come and get the rocks, right? You're
Right,
not, nobody's going to do that, right? Because why should they do it if Putin's just going to take over the country, especially if you're going to let him do that?
right.
Uh, and so we'll see, I expect that Zelensky will sign this deal tomorrow because it doesn't actually.
But
I
again,
mean,
it's not binding.
yeah, it doesn't actually add up to almost anything, at least in the near term. Now, Trump said that, oh, it's going to bring us great wealth, and down the line, that's certainly possible. And to be fair, rare earths and other minerals, these are important for the United States, but it's not this, it's not everything it's been made out to be. And I was grateful to these people like Dr. Baskaran and Mr. Milovanov to explain this yesterday because it seemed like it was going to be this big deal, and it really isn't. And that I think is unfortunate because it's taken up a lot of media bandwidth discussing this for, I think, not of an especially good reason. It's performative on both their parts, on both
Sure.
Trump's parts and Zelensky's part.
We've talked about this in previous episodes, but I come back to the notion that because the Trump administration is so fundamentally transactional in its foreign policy outlook, that I think it's relatively a net good that suddenly there's something that the Trump administration, in particular Donald Trump, thinks is of value in Ukraine that he
Yes.
can make money on, and therefore maybe we should defend democracy and uphold, European alliances and things like. I mean, those are all downstream from him being like, "Ooh, they've got stuff that can make me money."
Yes, and it also provides his international counterparts with a sort of method, right? They know
Well,
what
yeah,
he's
it
after, right?
it defines a paradigm through which you can actually have a conversation about why this is important.
That's right. And that's why all these things are going on. Now, mind you, also this week, the European foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, this was yesterday, mind you, was in Washington, D.C., and she was scheduled to meet with Marco Rubio. That meeting was canceled by the United States side for scheduling problems, right? And it was widely regarded as a snub of Commissioner Kallas. And I think that that's probably accurate. Right now, they had talked at the Munich Security Conference a couple of weeks ago. All right, but this was clearly a message being sent to the European Union. It's like, yeah, we don't really care about you. We would rather, talk unilaterally to EU members such as France or non-members such as the United Kingdom.
It's so tacky. I mean, it's dangerous and it's reckless, but it's also tacky.
Yeah, it's it's very, we might say, déclassé if we want to be European about it.
And I would like to. CNN reporting Keir Starmer, British Prime Minister, Arsenal fan, visiting with President Trump, meeting at the White House where they will discuss security guarantees for Ukraine, according to senior officials. Trump yesterday, that is Wednesday, dismissed the idea of robust security guarantees that Starmer sees as vital to ensuring that any peace agreement can endure. Earlier this week, Starmer announced increase in defense spending from 2.3 to 2.5% of British GDP. That the timing of that announcement cannot be a mistake.
I doubt it, yeah.
Immediately before he goes to meet with the United States president, so he can say, look, we're increasing our defense spending to help. I wonder, does Trump know enough or care enough about 0.2% of GDP increase in defense spending?
Oh no! In fact, he said that it's not enough.
Okay.
Right? He wants them all to be spending quite a lot more, as a matter of fact, which he
more
said
than the
publicly.
United States spends.
Yes, that's right. Well, to guarantee security in Europe, maybe Europe should be spending more. He would not be the first president to think so.
It's not a wild idea.
No.
What else is Sir Keir Starmer going to do with Donald Trump?
I don't think very much.
This is his first visit.
He's sort of, yes, that's right. He's going to reinforce the message that Macron delivered earlier this week. And again, as you say, it's his first visit. For instance, Trump has known Macron for quite a long time, right? And they have a sort of relationship, whereas Starmer and Trump are relatively unknown to each other by comparison. So they
Trump's a bit of an Anglophile generally.
Yes, that's true. However, for instance, Macron is a very sort of dynamic, energetic presidential
stylish
style. Yes. Whereas Starmer, I hate to put it in these terms, but I think that if Trump looks at a fellow like Starmer, the first thing that comes to his mind is doofus. Right, because Starmer is kind of a doofus. I'm sorry, I don't have any problem with him.
Sir Keir Starmer.
Yes, Sir Keir Starmer. He is kind of a doofus. That's all, right? And I just don't. It wouldn't matter if somebody else was president, right? But somebody like Trump, I think that's the first thing that's going to go through his mind, and will be.
He's got a casting director kind of lens.
Absolutely, right? And he's not shy about saying so, right? He used to say this all the time, straight out of Central Casting, right? Except that now he seems to be casting for the reboot of the Nazis and Hogan's Heroes. That's like, the people he's looking for, right? Every one of these people, they look like they could be in the Hogan's Heroes 2.0.
Okay, yeah. So Starmer's meeting with President Trump today. And do you want to dive into the actual rare earth circumstances that we've been talking about before we get to Germany?
No, I don't think so. Again, I don't think this rare earth deal actually amounts to all that much, right?
But Sam, I went to the time to research it because you put it in my email.
Well, fine.
So, you know what? Let's just talk about what the rare earth is. Okay.
Okay.
The BBC says Ukraine has significant deposits of rare earth metals. These are a group of 17 elements that are used to produce weapons, wind turbines, electronics, and other products vital in the modern world. Now, Kyiv estimates that about 5% of the world's critical raw materials are in Ukraine. among them titanium, lithium, uranium, copper, nickel, and others. Some commentators, this is the BBC, have described the U.S. offer as, quote, colonial, but Kyiv is interested in joint exploration of its resources. I mean, it's not colonial if you're getting a good revenue split and you're keeping the Russians out of your country.
That's right. And in fact,
Or is
Mr.
it?
Mr. Milovanov seemed to indicate yesterday that that it's a 50-50 split, right? Which, I mean, that's, maybe you would like Ukraine to get a little bit more, but that's not terrible.
Given the
Right?
circumstances, I'd take
That's right.
50-50 and a security guarantee.
Yeah, and as both he and Dr. Baskaran mentioned, I mean, this is unexplored, right? It's going to take a long time before any of these things
Right.
come out. But for instance, we discussed on our show last year, or perhaps even the year before, right, that China was tightening export controls on precisely these rare earth minerals, right? And they control something like 80 to 90% of the supply chain worldwide for them. So if Zelensky needed something to be able to offer up, this was not a bad thing to be able to offer, especially since he's not actually providing anything at all in the near term, literally nothing at all. And so this it's not as colonial as it was made out to be to begin with. Like, I think the offer that Bessent made 2 weeks ago was just
Colonial.
ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
That was out and out colonial resource extraction. And it seems as though the Ukrainians have been able to sort of talk Trump down from what may in fact have been merely his initial negotiating position. But these rare earth minerals and other kinds, titanium and things like this, these are important, right? People need them all the time, right? And so this could help ease tensions going forward. And just in a sort of, for instance, as soon as it seemed as though Zelensky was going to sign this offer from Trump, the Russians came out and said, we'd be very happy to come to a minerals deal with the United States, right? Because Russia has tons of minerals, and they would, in fact, they control a lot of the Ukrainian territory where the rare earth minerals exist, right? So they, just like, well, you don't need to make a deal with the Ukrainians. We'll just take over the country, and you can deal with us, right? And so, but between Ukraine with the minerals and France and Britain and perhaps other European nations with troops on the ground in Ukraine, you could see the beginnings of a sort of three or more way deal amongst the United States, Europe, and Ukraine in order that could perhaps not ensure continued U.S. support, right? But perhaps ensure that the United States just doesn't fully abandon Ukraine.
Right. It could stave off a surrender.
That's right.
Essentially.
And
Okay,
so
let's get to Germany.
yes,
We're running
because
out of time. Sorry.
this will figure right in
Yeah.
to what's been happening in Germany.
Right. So Germany, 82 million people, sixth biggest economy in the world by GDP. Wikipedia. Federal elections were held in Germany to elect the 630 members of the 21st Bundestag. The election took place 7 months ahead of schedule due to the 2024 collapse of the incumbent governing coalition. Following the loss of its majority, the government called and intentionally lost a motion of confidence in order to facilitate an early election. This was the fourth early election in the post-war German history and the first since 2005. This election took place last weekend.
Yeah.
BBC reporting Friedrich Merz conservatives have won, but Germany's 2025 election has thrown up some important and fascinating stories that reveal a country in flux. Alternative for Germany, AfD, we know them as Nazis 2.0, doubled its support in just 4 years to nearly 21% and has spread out from its support base in the east to become the second biggest political force in parliament. We'll put up a map right now. The outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz, SD, SPD had its worst performance in decades. They only secured a little over 16% of the vote. Even though it came in second, the AfD, the Nazis, blocked from being part of the next government because of a firewall operated by Germany's main parties who do not cooperate with any party seen as extremist since the end of World War II. Generally, a prudent policy, I would say, for the country that gave us the first iteration of the Nazis and started 2 world wars.
Well, no, they only started one. They did not start the First World War.
It's debatable.
Okay,
Safety
fine.
first. The blank check, Sam. It's one of the great debates of history. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Please.
Now, the firewall, I think I agree with you, is an eminently sensible idea. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, does not agree.
He has endorsed this Nazi party.
In his speech in front of the Munich Security Conference a couple weeks ago, he specifically said, there is no room for firewalls. And again, I want to emphasize that he made this speech in Germany 9 days before their election, seemingly lecturing an ally about how they should organize their elections. And I would like to point out to President Vance and anyone else concerned about this that
Vice President Vance.
I'm sorry, that Vice President Vance. That
We're not there yet.
In its entirety, American election law from the federal level on down is explicitly designed to exclude any third party. So no American has any right to lecture anybody else in any other country about excluding third parties. This is not a leg that Americans can stand on.
Sam, J.D. Vance doesn't care what the federal
No,
law
of
is.
course. And if I'm certain that everything that I've just said is something he knows or ought to.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, the AfD has risen in popularity since their inception after the Euro crisis. And in fact, their trajectory very much mirrors that of the Tea Party sort of gradually transforming itself into the Trump movement, right? As you'll recall, the Tea Party was originally a
fiscal.
Well, they said they were anyway, but it arose in reaction to the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009.
And
right?
the election of a black man.
Well, yes,
States.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And similarly, the AfD arose right after the corresponding European currency crisis, which took place a year or two later, right? Originally, their alternative was to membership in the European currency. And it only gradually was revealed that some of their leaders were, in fact, neo-Nazis. But
Hate it when that happens.
Yeah, but they're led today by one of their longtime stalwarts, Alice Weidel, who curiously...
A libertarian, Sam.
Not just that, but a lesbian. I don't think that gay marriage is legal in Germany, but her longtime life partner is of Sri Lankan descent. And so this is why I'm a little less eager to classify them as Nazis.
I'm just going with what the Germans say. They're extremists and they're far right.
Okay, fine. Right. It seems that, lesbian
The Germans say
marriage-
they're extreme, right?
Oh, they're
extremists.
They're the well-documented extremist party. In fact, Alice Weidel and her partner seem to live in Switzerland, which is, I think, a little weird too.
And again, I don't want to get over my skis, but we do have a name for extremist far-right parties in Germany.
Yes, that's right.
I just want to make sure I don't want to be hyperbolic incorrectly.
No, you're not. You'd certainly not be the only person to say things like this. Okay, so I don't want to take you to task a great deal for this. But again, the winner of this election is Friedrich Merz, and he's the head of the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, which we will remember as the party of previous Chancellor Angela Merkel. That, in fact, he was a rival with Merkel for the party leadership. And I've just lost my earphone, so I'm going to stick that right back in right now.
Yeah,
And
he lost the leadership and then quit politics, right?
that's right. And it was only after the Merkel government fell, after the last election, that he rejoined politics and became the head of the CDU. Now, he's never served in government, again, because he was Merkel's rival. She won the leadership contest. His faction was excluded from government, which is one of the reasons why he quit politics. So he's never been a minister of anything. But he's also not very popular. His personality is, shall we say, acerbic, right? And he's not the most charismatic person. He's very conservative, very pro-business, right? For instance, while he was not in
Yeah,
politics, he worked
became
for
a yeah,
BlackRock, right? I
yeah,
mean, and so and of course, Merkel's faction of the CDU was the more moderate wing of the party. So he's trying to make the CDU more conservative than it had been during her 16 years of leadership in the party. And so, uh, but he's got an opportunity now, and he's talking much along the same lines as Macron and Starmer, right? That we need to make Europe more independent of the United States, right? Because regardless of how things shake out this week or next month or whatever, right? We don't think that the United States can be relied upon as a permanent guarantor of European security anymore. So we need to start doing these things ourselves. And now, of course, just like in France and Britain, this will be difficult because the European economy is doing very poorly right now, not least in Germany, which has been in recession for about 2 years. Now, one of the reasons that the economy in Germany is not doing so well is because their industrial model and their export model just isn't holding up. And it's difficult to see how it's going to recover. Their once mighty auto industry has fallen behind, especially to the Chinese, in terms of innovation and overall appeal. And unless it gets off and gets on the stick, it's difficult to see how they're going to recover. Now, of course, they're not going to give up on that, and all will hope that their auto industry can recover. But it's a big job. But one way to stimulate uh, economic activity is to boost defense spending,
sure.
which in fact the Germans
We've
had been
seen that
doing.
in Germany before.
That's right. But the Germans had been doing that for the past several years. In fact, there's a number of sort of very modern drone producing firms in Germany that have been helping out with the Ukrainian war effort already. So Merz has already been talking about dramatically ramping up German defense spending and even with the idea of nuclear armaments. Now, that was in some ways, I think, more of a political statement in terms of wanting to share the nuclear defense umbrella provided by France and Britain. But they basically do that already. But I think he would want there to be a sort of formalistic guarantee about such things. And so Merz was sort of in the right place at the right time, right? The three-way coalition government of Olaf Scholz just was unwieldy to begin with and collapsed. And so it looks as though there will only be a two-party grand coalition between the CDU, CSU bloc and the SPD, which is something that has happened in Germany numerous times already. There's nothing unusual about that. It seems strange to us here in the United States. But a two-party coalition is generally more stable. It's not like a stool where you want three legs, right? In fact, for greater stability, you only want there to be two. So those, but of course, in politics, things don't happen quickly, and they don't happen quickly in Germany either. Uh, uh, Merz seems to want to. He thinks that form a coalition government by Easter, right? This is a political hurry, right? That's like a month and a half, more than a month and a half away, and that's a speedy coalition formation in Germany. It would be better if they could do it a little faster, and then Friedrich Merz can come and visit Donald Trump at the White House, and we can talk about that.
One other note from BBC's coverage about the growth of the AFD. It says if you look at the map, you could almost have traveled back in time to the Cold War when an Iron Curtain divided communist East Germany from West. The AFD's political base is in the East, but the AFD is spreading west too, says the BBC, and political loyalty to the old mainstream parties has gone. For 1 in 5 Germans, it has become normalized. Quote, "They're just normal people," end quote, said one young man of immigrant origin in Duisburg, a city in Western Germany's old industrial heartland. So if you've got descendants of immigrants saying the far-right extremist AFD are just normal people, that's concerning to me.
Well, yeah, but in a strange way, it's, for instance, people whose German ancestry goes back several generations have all learned in school about the depredations of the Nazi regime. People newer to the country haven't. And so that, I think, explains part of their appeal to more recent arrivals. But again, this is just another example of far-right parties rising all the way through the Western world. And so unlike in the United States, the German political system at least is able to exclude them from government. Whereas in our two-party system, if the far right takes over the right-wing party, that's it, right? It's a coin flip at best. And so we'll see how this, hopefully they'll be able to form the coalition government very soon. Because these things like increasing German defense spending, getting the German economy up and going again, these are important things. These things need to happen. We might wish that the Germans would never need to rearm, right? But we don't have that luxury right now, right? If Ukraine is to survive in anything like its current form, Europe is going to have to carry the ball. The Trump administration has made that clear, and they should probably be doing it anyway. As much as we have disdain for Trump, in this case, he's probably onto something.
I agree with that. Okay. That will do it for this week's edition of Working for Crusoe. What are we looking at for next week, Sam?
Well, next week we're going to have a terrific episode because Trump insists that the tariffs are going to be going forward. And we'll recall a month ago, Canada and Mexico were given a month of respite from the tariffs. But
what's the deadline? The 5th?
I think it's the 4th, yes.
4th, Monday?
That will be in plenty of time for...
Oh, no, 4th is Tuesday, excuse me.
Yes. Yeah. That will give us plenty of time. If we record on schedule, we can also cover next week's jobs report, which will come out on Friday. So those things should occupy a fair amount of our time, I would imagine.
All right. He's Sam. I'm John. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, folks.